Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this podcast, you will discover interviews with procurement and technical experts, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. These experts will help you to develop and grow, accelerate your career, improve your business, save money, and buy smart. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. My next guest is Steve Fredlund from Minnesota. Steve gained 30 years of corporate experience from the likes of Allianz, Medtronic, Thrivent, and 3M, with an overlapping 20 years of non-profit leadership experience, including bringing transformation to a community in northern Rwanda. Steve has served on a number of non-profit boards, is a professional public speaker, a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, and has an MBA with emphasis in non-profit management. He is also the founder and lead strategist for SF Solutions and small business, whilst also creating the Solving Box. For the last 15 years, Steve has been researching the true driving forces of authentic happiness and helps organizations increase engagement, productivity, and retention through greater happiness and problem-solving capabilities. Today, I want to discuss with Steve and understand how leaders and professionals may deal with high levels of stress and transform their lives, their businesses, and those around them. So, without any further delay, I welcome Steve onto the podcast. Hi, Steve.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that, man. I'm happy to be here. Sounds like somebody who doesn't really know what they want to do in life.
Well, you certainly achieved an awful lot in your career. I've read out part of your resume. So if people just gauge that, then you've been a very busy guy. So I guess during this journey, you've encountered your own significant levels of stress and strife. Perhaps you can unpack and share highlights of your journey for our listeners.
Yeah, like every journey, there's stress and strife, right? Like every good story, you think about Lord of the Rings or whatever, there's periods of great joy and there's periods of great stress. And I'm not sure I'm on the level of Tolkien's work, but that's it. And so there've been periods where, some of the worst periods, some of the most stressful periods of my life, honestly, weren't even the job itself. It was what was going on internally. So the job was stressful, but that really wasn't the problem. I like problem solving. I like digging in. I sort of like, untying those knots. But the most stressful times are when I feel like I'm just totally disconnected from myself. And, one of the most impactful moments was about 15 years ago. And that's what led me on this journey to figure out happiness is I would walk, there's this bridge across the Mississippi River in Minnesota. And every lunch hour I worked downtown, I'd walk across this bridge trying to figure out, why am I so miserable? And that was so stressful for me because my job was so great. My family was great. My marriage was great. Everything was great on paper, but I was so miserable. And I think that was a period of probably the most stress in my life, even though the career part of it was pretty manageable.
Okay. So that was the catalyst for you to start looking into this. But how on earth do you research happiness? Is it just through talking to people, or did you find some other divine inspirations out there?
Yeah, it was looking at my own journey, really being introspective about that, then talking to other people and starting to get these themes. What is actually going on? Like what actually causes our happiness? Then I started reading some research papers on that, started talking to some psychologists and therapists and started figuring like what actually causes happiness? What actually drives happiness? And of course, everybody has a different opinion on that. But what I like to do is try to make complex things simple. And that's what I was trying to do is try to figure out like, how can I actually explain this? How can I understand it for myself in a way that actually makes sense? And then it's something that I can take action on. So that was really the driving force is I didn't want to be, the PhD level happiness person talking about, all the different chemicals in our brain and all these different things, because there's people that are way smarter than me are doing those things. I wanted to figure out what is really at the core of our happiness in a way that things that we can actually change in our lives. So that was the motivation for it.
Okay. And certainly at the moment, and I'm sure you're seeing this as well, that for my colleagues, people in supply chain, the world is a bit of a crazy place at the moment. Trying to just buy the standard things you used to be able to buy in the stores is a challenge. We're all seeing rising costs. We're seeing inflation. We're seeing everything a little bit in a complete mess, I would say right now. And so there are huge challenges and pressures as a result of that. And obviously businesses are really struggling, and many businesses are, in a difficult place. And that means that ultimately their end customers dissatisfied. So thinking about all this difficulty at the moment, what's the process you follow to be able to determine a strategy to help troubled business leaders and professionals cope in these difficult times of, excessive stress, probably in some respects?
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. It's a tough one, right? Especially if you're a small business owner, or if you have a real vested interest financially in that situation. Because if you don't, there's tools that you can do to try to, how do I separate the work stress from who I am in my personal life and those pieces. But when you're so integrated with it, it's a tough nut to crack, because it's not only the business itself, it becomes your identity, right? Because if you're a small business owner, or if you're the key leader in an organization, that's your identity. When people say, "Hey, nice to meet you. Who are you?" and you say your name of your job or the name of your company, it's our identity. And so I think part of it is recognizing that isn't necessarily your identity. Realizing that life is bigger than the job, life is bigger than the stress, and that this is a knot that we can untie. This is something that we can figure out. And I think the key is really surrounding yourself with people that can actually help you figure those things out and empathize with you in that. Because one of the things is, when you're under all this stress as a business owner, or a supply chain expert, or whatever it is, a lot of times it's very lonely. Because people around you don't get it. Like, my wife has no idea what it's like to run a small business, right? She teaches, that's great, and she just likes the 9 to 5, do the thing, be done with it. She doesn't understand what it really, she supports me, but she doesn't understand it. My friends don't understand it. I come out of the corporate world, so my whole network is people that are punching clocks, doing those things. They don't get the stress that comes with it. So I think surrounding yourself, finding those people that you can surround yourself with, that are going to understand what it's like and be there for you emotionally, but then also can help you start to unpack that problem. I mean, because I'm a problem solver, I just think, all right, let's go, let's figure it out. And so I think you can either wallow and mired in that problem, or you start saying, well, let's start unpeeling this onion one layer at a time and figure it out. And so it's a tough nut to crack, but I think surrounding yourself with the right people, those that can empathize with you and say, man, I get it. And they truly do get it. And then those that can actually help you solve the problem. And a lot of times the answer out of this, getting into the weeds a little bit, but a lot of times the answer out of this is figuring out strategic partnerships, figuring out even partnerships with people that you consider competitors, and say, all right, let's figure this out together. We've been competitors, but we're both in the same situation. Let's figure this out together. And it might be time to start those relationships as well.
Do you have any examples, people that you've brought together to help them to decipher their troubles and try, as you say, unpack the different layers of problems and how to go about solving them? Have you got any great examples to share?
Yeah, I'd say the best example that's right at the top of my head is working with a guy who runs a roofing business, right? And so this is probably different than some of your stuff, but he's got the same issues, right? So he's got all, lumber supplies, everything is like going through the roof there. And then he has to deal with the insurance companies. And over the last couple of years, they'd made his job, at least in Minnesota, much, much harder. And so he's got all of these things that are coming at him. Like, there's no positives here, right? There's just, everything is negative. It's, this costs more. Now I can't get people because of the whole COVID thing and the unemployment, and it's hard to get people to work now. So lumber is way more expensive. All supplies are more expensive. The people don't want to work. There's that. And then the insurance is making it terrible. And most of his business is done through insurance work. There's a hailstorm and now it's time to replace a roof and all of those pieces. So with him, it's just a matter of sitting down saying, all right, I know this is terrible, right? This is terrible. And his initial reaction, well, not his initial reaction, but he's like, I should just go get a job. Like, this is just too much. This is too hard. But this is his whole dream, right? His whole dream is to run this business, and it becomes his identity. And so working with him, we've been able to unpack that little by little and find solutions to each one of those. Maybe things do a little bit differently. Maybe we move some of the business from insurance-based. What other options are there? How do we get those private contracts that aren't insurance-based? How do we get the remodels? How do we start to work with people who maybe budget's not an issue? So changing the clientele from, okay, a hailstorm, let's get as much of these houses that are covered by insurance and do these, generally for pretty cheap, but decent profit margin. How do we maybe transition to say, well, who are the clients that aren't dealing with insurance, that aren't really concerned about the increased price of lumber, and who are maybe willing to wait on their project for you to get the right people, or are willing to pay enough so that you can get the people that you need? So we've shifted a bit of his target client to now high-end clients. So now he's approaching and he's working with people that have, lakefront property and $1 million houses, and Minnesota, $1 million house is pretty big. For Los Angeles, not so much. But working with clientele, so it was really shifting that and saying, okay, does this still align with your overall heart, with your overall plan? And it did. All right, so let's start shifting in that direction. But it's creative problem solving, and sometimes you don't have that extra option. You have to figure out how do you make that work with your supply. But that's one example, I guess, where we've had a pretty good breakthrough. And now he'll go back to the insurance. Now what he feels like is now he's got options. And now he's actually can have all of his eggs aren't in one basket, if you will. So now he's got these clients and he's figured out how to actually work with them. And now he's getting referrals because those people refer each other, right? Oh my gosh, who did your roof? Who did this? Oh man, you got to talk to him. So there's that. And now he feels like he can do either or and shift as the winds blow a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, sounds a fascinating transition there. So would that have been in the form of just general conversations, a whiteboard exercise? Do you do mind mapping? How do all these things get sort of put into a vision so that you can start looking at each of these different pockets at a time?
It's, to me, I'm a clarity guy. Like I'm just clarity. There's an Einstein, I don't know if it's a quote or whatever, where a concept where he said if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes on the problem, 5 minutes on the solution. And I'm such a believer in that. So yeah, the whiteboarding actually happened by me and my own. After I have a conversation with him, I'd go back home to my whiteboard area and just go crazy there. But really, it's about clarity. It's just about asking questions. All right, so starting with who are you and what do you want out of your business? Like he has this problem about, increased cost and labor problems and insurance regulation. But I started asking him questions about who are you and what do you want out of the business? He's like, well, this isn't my problem. I'm like, we need to know this. Like, this is the grounding of all of this, because whatever the solution is has to be aligned with who you are and what you want of the business, because we can come up with different solutions. Like you could switch and start selling frying pans. Like that's an option. You can start selling knives. You can start selling meat out of the back of your truck. Like, there's all the kind of things that you can do, but who are you? What do you want? So to me, it starts there. And then it's really clarifying what is the actual problem. And so he just sort of said, everything's terrible. All right, well, let's break that down. What's everything? What is terrible? How do we define that? And then we started getting into these key 3 areas. All right, well, man, everything's so expensive. All right, let's talk about that. Exactly. Like run it down for me. Exactly what is going on? How much did it used to cost? How much do you need it to cost? How much does it cost? Where's the break-even thing? Labor. How many people do you need to do a job? How hard is it to get these people? What would you need to pay to get those people? And then, besides insurance, where else can you get business? All right. He did some work. I did some research online. Housing people, what are they doing? You just research, look it up. And so it's really just getting all of that information and saying, okay, well, here's the supply issue. Here's the labor issue. Here is the target market issues. Now let's start figuring out a solution that gets you there that's still aligned with who you are, what you want out of the business, what your dreams are for the future. So it's a lot of that kind of work. It's really, and all of that is clarity. None of that is solutioning. None of that is actually creating a solution. That's all just getting, the information, what's going on, what's the real root of the problem, what are the optimal possible solutions that we have out there, what are the constraints, what are the goals, all of these things that come together. And then you take a look at it and say, all right, where's the path forward? And it frankly wasn't that hard to figure out the path forward once we had the clarity, but I don't think either of us would have come up with start roofing houses for lake homes just out of the blue.
Yeah, no, I really like that, because he needed somebody with a different perspective, a different angle to be looking at this, because on his own, he probably wouldn't have come up with those different things. So I think that's a key message here is, as you said about earlier on, about having a team around you or have people that are not, so we say, embroiled in the day-to-day business, because you become sort of boxed in, your vision becomes boxed in, but somebody from completely out of the business to challenge some of those things. And the other part of it, as you say, is to make sure it's something he's going to enjoy once it actually changes. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, that's always a question I ask. What if this works? I think we always ask the question, what if it doesn't work? And that's a legitimate question. We need to know the risk. We need to know the downside. But what if it works? How would you feel about this if this actually worked? In 3 years from now, 5 years from now, all you were doing was doing lake homes. How would you actually feel about that? Because some people would say, oh my gosh, that's just not, those aren't my people. I don't want to do that, whatever. He was like, man, that'd be amazing. Well, good. Okay, that's a good question to ask. So yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Perfect. Okay, so Having researched your work, you refer to decision-making by default, which is quite an interesting concept. I haven't come across that one before. And so how being unintentional can result in a negative impact. Can you riff on this topic and explain your views and findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I have to back up a little bit to this idea of happiness and what is happiness. And I think ultimately happiness is when we are aligned with our actual what's going on in our world. When what's going on in our world is lined up with who we are, what we really want. And unhappiness is that misalignment between those two things. And I would argue that unhappiness, that misalignment between who we are and our actual reality, is caused by a couple of things. It's caused by, one, just the human experience, the variance of life, things that we can't control. COVID, right? I mean, one country invading another country, political problem, like all of these things that we can't really control cause these sort of problems. But the other piece that we can control are the decisions that we make day in and day out. And I would argue that part of the reason that many of us are unhappy is because we continually make decisions that aren't actually lined up with who we are and what we really want. We just sort of make decisions. We make decisions casually. And one of the areas of those casual decisions is making decisions by default. I would say there's three areas of making casual decisions. One is we make decisions by default because we just do it because that's the way it's always been done. The other way is because that's what we should do, in quotes, right? Well, hey, you should do this. You should do this. Okay. And the other way is that we think this is what people expect of us. So we make these decisions that are casual, but they're not really lined up with who we are. And that creates this misalignment between who we are and our actual reality. And we wake up one day and those decisions have accumulated to living somebody else's life. But specifically on the default side of it, humans are predisposed to making default decisions. This is just our deal. Like, we choose the default. And it takes a yeoman's effort to go above and beyond the default. And we see that in leadership all the time. Well, why are we doing it that way? Well, we've always done it that way. And I think sometimes we think that's a lower risk sort of deal because, all right, if Dave is the previous owner, now I come in as the owner and people say, why are you doing it this way? I say, well, Dave always did it this way. And then if something goes wrong, I can kind of blame you for that, right? If I change something and it goes wrong, now it's on me. So I feel like part of it is we just subconsciously think that's lower risk to just do things by default. And it's just easier, right? It's just easier to do things the way they've always been done. But that's a casual decision. And what happens is that accumulates and makes us unhappy. And so when I speak about this, I tell people, don't lead like you're choosing toothpaste, because that's one of the things, when who chooses toothpaste? Like, most of us don't actually have a taste test and do the research on which is most effective. We just use what we grew up with or what we married into, right? I mean, that's most of it. That's a default decision. And so that's how we lead. That's how we live our lives a lot of times, is just by default. So that's a long answer to a short question, but that's what I'm driving at when I talk about default-driven leadership. Yeah.
And that obviously encourages us to question all the things that we do. Is there a better way of doing this? Now, is there a more cost-effective, a time-effective way of doing these things? So we mustn't, as you say, sit on our laurels somewhat and just go around the same roundabout time and time again, because you don't change direction by going around the roundabout.
Yeah, I think it's sort of challenging people to move from finding a solution to a problem to finding the solution to a problem. And I tell organizations, if just think of every decision you made in your throughout the organization, every decision that was made, every problem that was solved, every strategy that was developed was just incrementally better, just a little bit better, 1%, 0.5%. I don't know, whatever you consider incremental, and some of them would be bigger, but with intentionality. If you're intentional about every decision and they were all incrementally better, where would your business be if every strategy, decision, and solution were a little bit better? And so that's what I'm trying to teach, is that there's those big decisions, right? Those big solutions when you crack the nut, like my friend now with those houses and the roofing thing. But then there's those small day-to-day decisions that I think we sub-optimize so much that they just accumulate and we end up being stuck and plateaued, when if we give more intentionality to each of those, we'd have breakthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. People often have a vision that leadership means one can sit back and become strategic and visionary. That's great, isn't it? All leaders can sit back in their office and imagine the future, if only, should we say. The reality is obviously somewhat different, and quite often leaders become embroiled in being problem solvers, micromanagers, and firefighters. So can you explain why there is a tendency for leaders to do this? What kind of impact it has on them, and what can be done to either prevent or reverse this trend?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. There's a lot of reasons why leaders are unable to become the visionary, innovative, creative leader that their organization needs. There's a lot of reasons. So again, I'll come back to clarity. You got to figure out what's really going on there. But one of the things that I found is that a lot of, especially in small to mid-sized businesses or small to mid-sized departments, nonprofits, a lot of it is they don't necessarily trust their people to delegate problems, to delegate decisions to. So either if they're like, just, man, I can't let go, I've got to do it myself. That's one problem. But a lot of times it comes down to trust. And it doesn't even mean they don't trust the people, but they just have this innate sense of, I've always been the problem solver, and now I'm going to have somebody else do it. And I don't trust that's going to be done right or the way that I would do it. And so that becomes this big wall there. So then what happens is, as a leader, you can't be strategic, innovative, and creative because you're busy fighting fires, as you say, and getting involved in the minutia of the detail and doing all that. And you're overwhelmed and you're stressed and you've got all these problems and all these everything. And so it's just terrible. But when you're doing that, what's also happening on the other side of the wall is your people are feeling like they're not empowered. They are not feeling engaged. There's no ownership there. There's no sense of belonging there because they know that they're not really being trusted to carry the weight of the organization. So then they just start treating their job like a paycheck. And then we complain as leaders, we complain that, well, they're just checking in and checking out. They're not engaged. Well, the reason they're not engaged is because you haven't empowered them. And these are people that are there because they've got something to bring to the table. Now, you can just throw stuff over the wall, or you can say, we can actually train them. Like, I believe that problem solving, decision making, developing solutions, that is a learned skill. Some people have more of that innately, just like some people are better at math or English or whatever, but they still can be developed. They still can be trained. And I think problem solving, decision making is something that we don't train people on. We just see, let's just throw stuff at them and see if they're good at it or not. And if they're not good at it, we don't give them any more problems. I think that's a real short-sighted view of leadership. So I think if we want to bridge that gap so that our leaders can become freed up, they can become happier, they can become more visionary, is to actually equip your people, train them how to solve problems, how to make decisions, and give them some rope to do that. Maybe on some low risk things at first, but test them, see, and then don't just make a binary decision, they're good or bad at it. Start working with them, say, okay, well, how did you solve the problem? And you can even do workshops on this where you say, take some random thing and work through it as a group. Say, how can we solve this problem? How could we actually consider this differently and actually teach your people how to solve problems? I think that's an answer for a lot of overwhelmed leaders who are overwhelmed because they're just taking on every decision.
Yeah, and I would say that another benefit, especially if you do this in a team environment, each of the members of the team start to see the strengths of other people that they perhaps didn't realize were there in the first place. And so they suddenly realize that this individual, he's a super genius with maths or something like that. I didn't realize this guy was so smart in this area. And obviously, when their own strengths come through as well, everybody starts to recognize the benefits and what they have to offer and bring to the table. And surely then also the job itself becomes more fun, more interesting, and they're more happy in their own work, which has got to be good for the business.
I love that. There's nothing I can add to that. That's exactly right. If we want to, well, I say there's nothing I can add and then I talk more, but like what is that? There's nothing I can add, but let me say more words. It's like at the end of a ball game when they interview somebody and they're like, I'm speechless. And then they go on for 3 minutes. I have nothing to say, but here, let me say something. But just what you said there just triggered, man, engagement and ownership. We think about, especially in bigger companies that I've noticed, employee engagement. We develop employee engagement programs, and we try to, create employee engagement out of these programs when really the heart of it is belonging, is a sense of ownership, is a sense of feeling like you are part of something bigger than yourself and that you want to be on that team. And exactly what you just said, when you do stuff in team environments and you start recognizing the gifts and the strengths that everybody has, you start realizing, boy, if they do this and I do this, how that works together, like that creates such ownership. And that starts creating this idea of the collective we. And that's when I tell you, no matter what I've done, whether it's corporate world, small business, nonprofit stuff, when I start hearing people say we, I do podcasts, and just the other day, I just started a podcast and somebody said, you know what we should do? And I'm like, yes, I've arrived, because they said we, not, hey, do you know what you should do? And I think as a leader, that's a great tip for you. How much are people talking about you versus we? When they send you an email with an idea, did they say you or do they say we? And I think that gives you a pretty good gauge of how much ownership you have. But what you nailed right there is ownership and engagement. And that's so critical.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. So another area, and we touched on this before we started recording today, was your concept, your referral in your YouTube videos as peeps in your Jeep. And I said it right this time. So that's all about surrounding yourself with the right people to help you, get from A to B. And it's all about the environment, perhaps, that you live in and thrive in as well. So talk about peeps in your Jeep and how do you get the right people to come on your journey?
Oh, it's so good. So that was actually my first TED Talk was the right peeps in your Jeep. And I use a story from Africa. I've done some humanitarian work there, but really the concept behind it is how critical is I became so aware over there how critical it is to be surrounded by the right people in every area of life. You've got the Jeep that drives through your personal life, and you got the work Jeep, and sometimes there's crossover in those things. But man, when you look around your Jeep, it's all figurative. But think about your Jeep, your small business Jeep, your work Jeep, your family Jeep. Who's in that Jeep with you? And are they the right people? Now, the right people for you, Dave, might not be the right people for me. It has to be, who are the right people for you? So then that's based on, what are you trying to accomplish? Who are you? What are you trying to accomplish? And so that's been a huge part of my journey, because I'm a people pleaser. The idea of actually being intentional about building relationships or ending relationships is something that was incredibly foreign to me until I started to do it. And then I'm like, my life is so much better, so much happier now that I've started doing that. You don't have to be a jerk about it, but to start to position people in your Jeep, to invite people in, and to frankly kick people out or to move them to the back seat away from you, I think is so important. And so in the realm of business, if you're a business owner, if you're a nonprofit leader, if you're in a career, look at those people around you and say, what are they doing? Are they bringing life to me? And it's not all about you. It's about what you can give to them too. But are these the right people to go on this journey with? And again, that comes back to clarity. Well, where are you trying to go? I use the analogy of a safari, and I've been on several of them in different parts of Africa, and they're all very different. Like, we think of safari. If you've never been on a safari, you think of it in one way, right? We've all got the same view of a safari. Well, they're incredibly different. Like, we've been on many different things. You can climb up mountains to see mountain gorillas through a tropical rainforest. There's all kinds of things that you can do that are safari. And so when you think about your work, think about that. You can define the safari that you want. What does that look like for your life? And then who are the people that you need to do that? But it comes back to clarifying, where are you trying to go with your business, and who do you want to do it, and how do you want to do it? And then who are the people that you need to surround yourself with?
Yeah. I think there's one thing that I think people need to be careful of, is that people tend to be driven to people like themselves.
Yeah.
What you're looking for is the right skill sets, obviously, and the people that are around you to challenge you as well, not just to go along with your train of thought. So I think, if you've got anything to say about how do you make sure you get the right skill sets, as well as the personalities that you're going to gel with, as opposed to just buying a replica of yourself and bringing them in the same Jeep?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you clarified that. So that's such an important point. Like, if I'm, for my personal life, right? If I'm like, okay, I want to watch a ball game and have fun, I want people similar to me, right? I want people that want to watch a ball game and have fun. I don't want people that are not going to enjoy that, right? So that's the situation. But in the work world, or in the small business world, what do I need? I need people that can drive me. I need, like you said, a good mix of skill sets. And so the way to do that, and a lot of times that requires the outside help, right? It needs somebody else to tell you, here's what you need, here's the problem with what you have. But yeah, again, it comes down to, what are you trying to do in your business? And what do I need? Okay, well, I need somebody to make sure that I stay on track. I need somebody to make sure that I stay authentic to who I am and the vision of the company. And so that's going to take somebody with this, the confidence to be able to come at me and tell me those things. And maybe that's somebody maybe it's an employee, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's an outside source, whatever that is. But yeah, and then what are we trying to do on the business? Well, here's what we're trying to accomplish. What skills do we need? And they're going to be different people, different personality. And I'm just such a believer. I know diversity, equity, inclusion is such a big thing. And I believe it's the right thing to do for business, but I believe it's so important. If you actually want to make optimal decisions, you need diverse perspectives, whatever that looks like for you. And that can include strengths, that can include backgrounds, that can include, experiences. That diversity of experience, the diversity of how people think about a problem is so critical to optimizing a solution. And that's what I'm all about. So yeah, if it's all a bunch of actuaries sitting around solving a problem, we're going to all get to the same solution. And we're going to say, yeah, aren't we awesome? But then I bring in a marketing person, and I bring in a supply chain person, and I bring in these other people, and they're like, man, you got to twist this around and look at it through a different lens. Man, that solution just becomes so much better. So yeah, you're right. The right peeps in your Jeep isn't always, 12 different Daves sitting in the Jeep. It's Dave and Steve and Jill and all of these other people.
Great, great. Now, you have created a framework called the Solving Box. Now, I'm quite interested in what that is, how you use the tools in there. So can you give us an overview and tell us how it's transformed other businesses and sort of delivered the power and the, should we say, the results that people have been looking for?
Yeah, it's really something we didn't mention it by name, but we touched on it earlier, actually. Where it came from was a few years ago. Somebody challenged me, how do you solve problems? That's been, we all have strengths and weaknesses, but that's been a strength of mine my whole career is what are these really complex things, blank sheet of paper, and I'm the one that gets the knock on the door and says, hey, can you figure this out? And I've been able to do it. But I never really could explain how I did it. And so I was challenged, can you put that down? Like, how are you actually doing it? And so I started recording when I was solving problems, like, what am I actually doing things? And the result is the solving box. And so I'll kind of talk through it a little bit, but really now I'm using that for doing exactly what we talked about earlier. When people say, how can I train my people to become better decision makers, better problem solvers? That's the tool that I have them use. And it's really, excuse me, it really starts with clarity. I've got a little, I don't know if you have a graphic and all, but you top left corner, there's clarity. What really is the problem? What's really going on? What are we trying to accomplish? And then it takes you a couple different directions. One is figuring out what is the universe of possible solutions. Like, what are all the, like, just brainstorm. Don't worry about honing it down. Just what could be a solution to this? And you can have a lot of fun with that, of course. And the other way is if you look at, okay, who are all of the stakeholders and what are their goals and what are the constraints that they have? We know it has to be at least this. We'd love to have it be this. Here's the things, the metrics that we care about, and talk to all the different stakeholders. And so now you have this universe of possible solutions that you've done independently of figuring out what are all the goals and constraints that are involved in this problem, in this decision. And then you bring it together and you start looking at the possible solutions in the context of the goals and the constraints. And it starts narrowing down quite quickly from there. Like, well, one of our constraints is that we have to have an ROI of at least 8%. Well, okay, this solution clearly is not going to do that because that's just sort of a fun, crazy thing that's going to cost us a bunch of money. So you start doing those things and you hone it down. And then the real power that I found is this iterative process. So instead of that just creating one solution, it might reduce the solution set a bit, but then you go through this whole process again, of course, depending on how important the decision is. And you start going back now, you start looking at it through the stakeholder lens again. Say, is there anything that we missed there? Are these goals really the goals? Are these constraints really the goals? Based on what we've learned from our conversation, these constraints and goals, are they still applicable? Are they different? Are there more? Are there less? And then we also look at the universe of solutions. And this is where we start to maybe combine some things. It's almost like portfolio theory where you say, well, here's this stock and this bond, but if we combine them, we actually get a better risk reward profile than we would have independently. And it's the same kind of thing there. We start to say, man, all these great conversations we've had, what we could do? We could actually take this one, combine it with this one, and that actually would meet the goals and constraints. So we start getting creative there. We bring it back together, assess it, and then see where we land, and then do it again, like do it as many times as possible. Because what I've learned is at least how my brain operates, and I think a lot of the problem solvers, is that we're constantly trying to optimize. And when I tell people, like, if they hire me for like a 10-hour consulting thing, I'm like, I don't want to do 10 hours in one day. Let's do like 2 hours a day for 5 days in a row, because my mind's going to be subconsciously working on that thing all night. And you're going to get all that free computer time. But to me, that's that iterative process to me is where the meat really is. So that is the solving box.
That's quite interesting. That's a very different take on solving problems. I've been in manufacturing for pretty well all my life. So I'm used to tools like, failure modes and effects analysis, DMATE, define, measure, analyze, improve control, fishbone diagrams, and so forth. There's so many tools we use in manufacturing to get into problems, more recently is 8D and so forth. So this is a very different take on that. So I find that really fascinating. I'll have to look into that some more now. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know how it does apply to the manufacturing world too, because a lot of the problems that I've solved on are sort of blank sheet of paper, or here's just something really complex, almost abstract. How can we possibly do this? So it'd be interesting to see the application and how that does work in the manufacturing world.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming close to the end of our time. So let's give you the opportunity now. How do people find out more about your teachings, find more about yourself? Where do they go? What sort of platforms are there available?
Yeah, I'd say I'm everywhere on social media, but pretty much LinkedIn is where I do most of my stuff. I do a little daily video I call Steve's Daily Stool, and that is intentional. People are like, do you know the meaning of that? I'm like, yeah, that's what makes it funny. It's Steve Daly. It's just me sitting on a stool and I got a whiteboard. I just share a couple minutes on different things that are in my mind. So connect with that. I love to have conversation there. And then if you're a small business owner, nonprofit leader, kind of a smaller business, and you're looking for support, smallbusiness.com is an effort that we've done specifically for those folks where we cut the rates. We do all kinds of free consultations just to really help people that are in that space, because I think they're the lifeblood of our communities. And if we can help small businesses succeed, communities become more vibrant. And then stevefredlund.com is more of my speaking stuff and kind of high level. Who is this guy? What's he up to? That kind of stuff. And either way, you can set up a free call, and I'd invite your listeners to do that. And let's just chat. I'm not a sales pitch guy. So we would just chat, see if I can add some value, and then we just take it from there.
Fantastic. Okay. So one final thought question from yourself. Also, you've helped many different leaders from different disciplines, industries, etc. over time, and you've no doubt transformed quite a lot of lives and businesses as a result. So aside from the examples you shared today, if you were going to say one more example to the listeners, what would be probably the most impactful that of the changes you've helped to make that has demonstrated the benefits of taking action? What would be that story you would share that would really be almost like the epitome of what you do?
Yeah. Well, do you mind if I use a nonprofit example, or do you want me to keep it in the business space?
Whichever works for you, Steve. I'm happy.
Because I've got small business, I've got corporate, I've got nonprofit. But I mean, just because I'm the most proud of it, I'd say the nonprofit work that I've done and just the impact that we had. So back in mid 2000s, I just had a heart for the AIDS pandemic in sub-Saharan Africa. So I started researching and started getting involved. And at the same time, our community in East Central Minnesota was very divided, just very divisive over, political and religious and school situations and all kinds of stuff, just very divided. And I started thinking, is there a way that I can create a solution that's going to help both of these things? And that's what I do. And so long story short, I ended up starting a movement called Our Response, which is really about uniting East Central Minnesota to respond to global poverty, disease, and suffering. And so it was about taking all of these divisive situations and saying, all right, we're going to come together for the sake of something higher than any of these things that we're talking about. And then we're going to have an impact in Rwanda, Africa. And so that's what I did. It was a 12-year project. We had some people on the ground in Rwanda doing the actual day-to-day stuff and helping them transform their community. But at the end of the day, we raised $3 million with no paid staff. I didn't take a dime. We had no paid staff, no overhead, no major donors, out of rural Minnesota. Like, this is a rural area. Like, the biggest town is 8,000 people. And so we raised like $3 million over 12 years. And all that money went to Rwanda, and the communities were transformed. And then the project ended because they got to where we wanted them to go to. So clean water, medical facilities, all this kind of impact. And the reason I bring that up is just because it's one of these things where it just feels like that's just too big. It's just too big. People here are just too divisive. But I think it shows complex, problem solving. What can be done when you really get at the heart of what are the issues? And then I think the biggest piece is the power of vision. Like, because we didn't have paid staff, we didn't have big funding like that. All we had was vision. All we had was this vision of a united East Central Minnesota and the power of impacting lives over there. And people bought into it, and people got behind it, and people got so excited about it. So I don't even know what your initial question was, but that's what came to mind. Is just that I'm very proud of it because of what was accomplished. But I think I learned so much about leadership through that process, things I did wrong, things I did right, people that we brought in, like you said, a good mix of people that challenged how I was thinking about things, because I bring a real analytical approach to things. And so I would be on stage talking about $1 million and this and that and all the things. And somebody's like, just tell the story of Nadine, tell the story of Josie Ann. And so I started just telling the stories of the experiences we had over there. And then when people just got super engaged. And so that's where I needed somebody that had a different perspective than me. So long answer to probably what was supposed to be a short question, but you get me fired up about Rwanda, and there I go.
It's wonderful to see the passion and the impact of something like that, to transform people's real lives, that it's not just earning a little bit extra profit or a few bucks. This is, good, wholesome stuff, good for the heart and the head.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I was going when you said that, because that it's real world stuff. I mean, putting more money in my pocket and helping my family and the community that way, that's great. That's all fine. But yeah, this feels like we changed that, not just for this generation, but for the next generation. And we gave people here a vision of what it would look like if we worked together on something.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a great note to finish on. So, Steve, well, thank you for sharing all that information today. It's been really interesting and fascinating. And I wish you all the best for other wonderful experiences that you've helped people go through.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for what you do, man. This is fantastic stuff.
Thank you very much. Take care and see you again. So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.